Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. Pakistan's President Arif Alvi says Islamabad will never abandon Kashmiris who have been braving Indian atrocities for decades. He said this while addressing a joint session of the parliament to mark the advent of the new parliamentary year. Alvi said Pakistan strongly condemns India's attempts to change the demography of occupied Kashmir. He urged the international community to take notice of India's illegal actions in the occupied valley. Iran says it has seized a United Arab Emirates ship violating its territorial waters earlier this week. In a statement, Iran's foreign ministry said the ship's crew has also been detained. It added the incident comes after UAE Coast Guards shot dead 2 Iranian fishermen and seized a boat in the Gulf. Tensions have risen between the two countries since the UAE and Israel signed a deal to normalize diplomatic ties last week. The Taliban have rejected a US Defense Department's report that suggested that the group keeps close ties with Al-Qaeda. In a statement, a Taliban spokesperson said such provocative reports only serve to make Afghans even more skeptical about US intentions for peace. He said the group is committed to the Doha peace deal and will continue to fulfill its part of the agreement. In Belarus, the government has launched a criminal case against opposition leaders, accusing them of trying to seize power. In a video message, Prosecutor General Alexei Navalny said the creation of a coordination council by the opposition undermines national security. Belarus has been rocked by days of violent protests against the alleged rigging in the August 9 presidential election. The US has recorded over 1,300 deaths overnight, raising the toll to over 173,000 with 5.5 million infections, while Brazil has reported more than 1,200 deaths and over 49,000 new cases in the past 24 hours. India sees highest single-day jump in cases with nearly 70,000 tested positive, taking case load to over 2.8 million, while 977 people died overnight. Pakistan continues to report a downward trend in COVID-19 cases and deaths as 8 people lost their lives, while 513 tested positive in the past 24 hours. Globally, the pandemic has infected over 22.4 million people and claimed more than 786,000 lives. And in football, Bayern Munich beat Olympique Lyonnais by 3-0 to reach the finals of the Champions League at Estadio José Alves. Bayern will be looking for their 6th European crown when they face Paris Saint-Germain in the final on Sunday. Those were the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Pakistan's President Arif Alvi says Islamabad will never abandon Kashmiris who have been braving Indian atrocities for decades. He said this while addressing a joint session of the parliament to mark the advent of the new parliamentary year. The president said Pakistan strongly condemns India's attempts to change the demography of occupied Kashmir. He said Kashmir will get freedom soon. Alvi also urged the international community to take notice of India's illegal actions in the occupied valley. He also lauded Prime Minister Khan's stance on Israel that Islamabad won't accept Israel until Palestinians are granted their rights. The president also said the country's economic situation is improving despite the coronavirus pandemic. Alvi said the world is now recognizing Pakistan's successful response to the pandemic. Pakistan has summoned a senior Indian diplomat to register strong protest over ceasefire violations along the line of control. In a statement, the Foreign Office said unprovoked fighting by Indian forces resulted in serious injuries to a 70-year-old woman in Subskot sector. Spokesman Zahid Hafiz Chaudhry said the Indian forces have continuously targeted civilian areas. He said India has so far committed 2,027 ceasefire violations, resulting in 16 fatalities and critical injuries to 166 innocent civilians this year. Chaudhry said these violations of international law reflect consistent Indian attempts to escalate the situation along the LOC. He said Indian actions along the line of control are a threat to regional peace and security. Iran says it has seized a United Arab Emirates ship violating its territorial waters this week. In a statement, Iran's foreign ministry said the ship's crew has also been detained. It added UAE Coast Guards shot dead 2 Iranian fishermen and seized a boat in the Gulf on Monday. Tehran also summoned the UAE's charge d'affaires in Tehran to register its protest. According to the foreign ministry, the UAE has apologized over the incident and is ready to pay compensation. Tensions have risen between the two countries since the UAE and Israel signed a deal to normalize diplomatic ties last week. Iran considers the deal as a betrayal to the Palestinian cause. The Taliban have rejected a U.S. Defense Department's report that suggested that group keeps close ties with the Al-Qaeda. In a statement, a Taliban spokesperson said such provocative reports only serve to make Afghans even more skeptical about U.S. intentions for peace. He said the Taliban don't need support from any foreign organization. He said the group is committed to the Doha peace deal and will continue to fulfill its part of the agreement. On Tuesday, the U.S. report alleged that Al-Qaeda continued to support the Taliban in attacks on security forces. This comes as the Kabul administration and the Taliban seek to start intra-Afghan talks as part of the Doha deal. China and Russia have slammed the U.S. over its bid to reinstate the UN sanctions on Iran. In separate press briefings, the Chinese and Russian foreign ministries called Washington's snapback measure illegal. China's foreign ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian said the U.S. snapback measure is illegitimate and it unilaterally quit the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. While Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said Washington's absurd move to reimpose Tehran arms embargo has no political grounds. Earlier, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo threatened to sanction Beijing and Moscow if they refused to comply with the measures against Tehran. Pompeo also lamented European nations' decision to abstain from the UN Security Council vote, saying it made the European people less safe. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump directed Pompeo to submit a complaint about Tehran's non-compliance with the 2015 nuclear deal.
Today, I'm directing the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, to notify the UN Security Council that the United States intends to restore virtually all of the previously suspended United Nations sanctions on Iran. It's a snapback, not uncommon.
Now, the Security Council will have 30 days to adopt a resolution to extend the sanctions relief for Tehran. Otherwise, the measures will automatically come into effect. Now, moving on, Iran has unveiled new locally made ballistic and cruise missiles amid U.S. pressure to halt its missile program. The announcement comes as Washington is pushing to extend a UN-imposed arms embargo on Iran. Iranian Defense Minister Amir Hatami said the ballistic surface-to-surface missile called Matir Qasim Soleimani has a range of 1,400 kilometers, while the cruise missile called Matir Abu Mahdi has a range of over 1,000 kilometers. The ministry said the newest Iranian cruise missiles will further strengthen Iran's deterrence power. President Hassan Rouhani said the increase of Tehran's cruise missiles from 300 to 1,000 in less than 2 years is a great achievement. China says Hong Kong will suspend some legal cooperation with the U.S. in response to its move to terminate 3 bilateral pacts with the city. At a briefing, China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian urged Washington to correct its mistakes over Hong Kong. Earlier, the US State Department terminated the agreements, expressing concern over Beijing's new security law in the territory. It said these agreements covered the surrender of fugitives, transfer of convicted persons, and tax exemptions from ship operations. Beijing has defended the law as necessary to restore order and preserve prosperity after months of violent anti-government protests last year. In Belarus, the government has launched a criminal case against opposition leaders, accusing them of trying to seize power. In a video message, Prosecutor General Alexei Navalny said the creation of a coordination council by the opposition undermines national security. Belarus has been rocked by days of protests against the August 9 vote that gave President Alexander Lukashenko a landslide victory. Opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya dismissed the election as fraudulent and announced the creation of a coordination council to ensure a transfer of power. But Prosecutor General Alexander Konyuk launched a criminal case against the new opposition body, accusing it of an illegal attempt to seize power. This comes after Lukashenko ordered police to end mass protests against the alleged rigging in the August 9 election. Meanwhile, Russia's President Vladimir Putin has warned against any external interference in Belarus's domestic affairs. In a phone call with European Council President Charles Michel, Putin said any pressure on Belarusian leadership will be counterproductive. The two sides agreed that an early normalization of the situation in Belarus favors both Russia and the European Union. The US has recorded over 1,300 deaths due to COVID-19 overnight, with the toll crossing 173,000 with over 5.5 million infections. While Brazil has reported more than 1,200 deaths and some 49,000 new cases in the past 24 hours. Now, globally, the pandemic has infected over 22.4 million people and claimed more than 787,000 lives. More in this report.
As news of vaccines being made across the world stokes hope for many, the coronavirus continues to claim thousands of lives each day. Brazil has expressed cautious optimism that the country's outbreak may be slowing down as the number of new deaths and cases reported dips after a July peak. While in the US, President Donald Trump has touted convalescent plasma as his latest coronavirus treatment.
But I've heard fantastic things about convalescent plasma, and I've heard numbers way over 50% success. And people are dying, and we should have it approved if it's good. And I'm hearing it's good. I heard from people at the FDA that it's good.
In Europe, despite reporting another post-lockdown peak in infections, French President Emmanuel Macron has ruled out reimposing national lockdown. Whereas Spain has issued orders for an outdoor smoking ban, nightclubs to shut, and a curfew on bars and restaurants to help slow the spread of COVID-19. While New Zealand reported 5 new confirmed cases as the nation battles a fresh outbreak in its biggest city of Auckland. In Australia, the second most populous state of Victoria has reported a small increase in the number of cases, raising hopes that the lockdown is yielding results.
It's too early, sadly. I know it's very frustrating, and we'd all love to know a clear blueprint every single day and we tick them off and move from one phase to another. We would love that, the notion, and I'm sure Victorians would too. But the issue around the fact that this is not just wildly infectious, but it can be stubborn. It can sit there and be really difficult to extinguish or even to bring down to a much more sustainable number.
In Asia, mainland China reported 7 new imported cases with no domestic transmissions across the country. Meanwhile, South Korea has reported 288 more cases overnight.
India has reported the highest single-day jump in its COVID-19 cases, with nearly 70,000 infections being reported across the country. The jump in cases takes the country's caseload to over 2.8 million. The health ministry said 977 people died overnight, bringing the count to nearly 54,000. The ministry reported there are over 686,000 active cases in the country. It said the Maharashtra state remains the worst affected in the country, making it more than 37% of the country's cases. India is the third worst hit country from the coronavirus pandemic after the US and Brazil. Now, Pakistan continues to report a downward trend in new COVID-19 cases and deaths as 8 people lost their lives overnight. The Health Ministry says 513 people tested positive in the last 24 hours. The country's death toll has risen to 6,209, while the infections are nearly 291,000. The ministry says the number of active cases across the country is 11,945. It reported a recovery rate of over 93% across the country. Sindh remains the worst hit province with over 127,000 infections, while Punjab has reported nearly 96,000 cases. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Welcome back. Israeli soldiers martyred a Palestinian youth near the Deir Abu Mishal village in the West Bank. Officials said Mohammed Haziz succumbed to his wounds after Israeli troops shot 3 Palestinians. The Palestinian Red Cross said the 2 wounded youths were taken to the hospitals in Ramallah. The official said the Israeli army informed Haziz's family about his death hours after the soldiers had detained him with fatal injuries. They said the Israelis are yet to hand over the youth's body. Earlier, the Israeli alleged the youth carrying incendiary materials and tires, wanting to set them on fire. US President Donald Trump says he expects Saudi Arabia will join the Israel-UAE deal known as the Abraham Accord. Speaking at a press conference, Trump said a lot of countries wanted to join the deal. Under the US brokered deal, Israel has agreed to suspend West Bank annexation for a complete establishment of diplomatic ties with the UAE. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia says it will not forge a diplomatic relationship with Israel until Tel Aviv signs a peace accord with the Palestinians. It added that Israel's unilateral moves with regard to settlements in the West Bank are hindering chances for peace in the Middle East. Lebanon's Hezbollah says it will not evaluate the verdict of the UN tribunal that convicted its member in the 2005 killing of former Premier Rafiq al-Hariri. While addressing media, Hezbollah MP Hassan Fadlallah said the movement is not concerned about the verdict. Fadlallah said the group has never recognized the court and its stance has been further solidified by this new verdict. While the court found no evidence of direct involvement with the leadership of Hezbollah, the judges said the killing was clearly a politically motivated act of terrorism. The movement has been under intense scrutiny as many allege its involvement in the port blast as well, which killed more than 180 people. US Senator Kamala Harris has accepted the nomination for Vice President on the 3rd night of the largely virtual Democratic National Convention. Harris is the first black woman and Asian American on a major US presidential ticket. Details in this report.
The coronavirus pandemic has forced the Democrats to abandon the cheering throngs, fanfare, and razzmatazz of the typical party convention. So they went with a virtual event of pre-recorded and live speeches in Philadelphia. Speaking at the convention, Kamala Harris assailed President Donald Trump's failure of leadership. She said President Trump's disastrous leadership has cost lives and livelihoods during the COVID-19 pandemic. She urged American voters to come together to elect Biden and beat Trump in the November 3rd presidential election.
We must elect a president who will bring something different, something better, and do the important work. A president who will bring all of us together. Black, white, Latino, Asian, Indigenous, to achieve the future we collectively want. We must elect Joe Biden.
Meanwhile, former US President Barack Obama was the headline act of the night as he accused his successor of dealing with the presidency as a reality show.
Donald Trump hasn't grown into the job because he can't. And the consequences of that failure are severe. 170,000 Americans dead. Millions of jobs gone, while those at the top take in more than ever. Our worst impulses unleashed, our proud reputation around the world badly diminished, and our democratic institutions threatened like never before.
Obama said electing Joe Biden, his vice president and now the Democratic candidate for president, will ensure survival of American democracy. Biden will take on the Republican President Trump in presidential elections on November 3rd.
Well, Russian opposition politician Alexei Navalny has gone into coma after allegedly being poisoned. Navalny's spokeswoman Kyra Tarmish alleges he fell sick after drinking a cup of tea laced with poison. Yarmish says he is in intensive care and on an artificial lung ventilator. Hospital officials say it is not certain that Navalny was poisoned or not, but tests are being conducted to find the reason for his sickness. Navalny started feeling ill when returning to Moscow from Tomsk in Siberia by plane a day earlier.
Naturally, poisoning is considered as one of the possible reasons of the deterioration in the condition, but besides that, there could be a number of acute states that lead to the same clinical signs. We are working on everything: eliminate, confirm, and work.
Alexei Navalny, a lawyer by profession and an anti-corruption activist, is a fierce critic of the Putin administration. Now moving on, Ukraine's presidential office says the country's armed forces will be withdrawn from 4 more locations in the eastern Donbass region. The statement comes after the trilateral contact group of Russia, Ukraine, and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe held a video conference. President's office said 20 areas discussed at last year's Normandy 4 summit in Paris will also be cleared of mines. The statement said this will enable the Paris Agreement's articles to be realized more quickly. The OSCE's head of special missions, Yasar Halit-Shevik, said a ceasefire has been observed in eastern Donbass since July the 27th. Russia and Ukraine have been at odds since Russia annexed Crimea after a controversial referendum in 2014. South Korea's Green Cross Co. has received regulatory approval for Phase 2 human clinical trials of its experimental COVID-19 plasma treatment drug. The company said the trials will test the safety and efficacy of the drug in 60 severe patients with underlying conditions like pneumonia. Its therapy is the country's first to enter Phase 2 for coronavirus plasma treatment. Meanwhile, Mexico said it will carry out Phase 3 testing of the Russian coronavirus vaccine. Elsewhere, Turkey is in talks with Russia, Germany and China about conducting Phase 3 trials for coronavirus vaccine. Cuba will also start clinical trials next week of a potential vaccine called Soberana 01, developed by its state-run Finlay Institute. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi has arrived in China to attend the second round of the China-Pakistan Foreign Ministers' Strategic Dialogue. The first meeting of the dialogue was held in March last year. Qureshi said his visit will prove to be beneficial one for both the countries. The dialogue is aimed at strengthening strategic relations between Islamabad and Beijing over a range of issues. During a meeting, both the sides will discuss ways of strengthening cooperation, COVID-19 and regional and international issues. Qureshi is accompanied by senior officials, while the Chinese delegation will be led by Foreign Minister Wang Yi. In Pakistan, 14 people have died in torrential rains overnight in different parts of most populated Punjab province. Rescue officials say several were injured in rains that devastated the central region of the province. They said 5 people were killed in Mandi Bahauddin after a fragile home's roof collapsed. The officials said 4 others were killed in a similar incident in the eastern Lahore city. In Chakwal, 3 laborers lost their lives after being stuck in a coal mine during rains. 2 others died in Sheikhupura city. Hurricane Genevieve brushed the southern tip of Mexico's Baja California peninsula as 2 people drowned in heavy seas. The U.S. National Hurricane Center said a hurricane warning was in effect for the resorts of Los Cabos and the town of Todos Santos. It warned that the rainfall from Genevieve may lead to life-threatening flash flooding and mudslides in the area. The storm is also expected to produce swells which are likely to cause life-threatening surf and rip current conditions. The National Met Service reported the center of hurricane is located 75 kilometers southwest of Cabo San Lucas town, as the hurricane has now weakened to Category 1 storm. Meanwhile, astronaut Chris Cassidy managed to capture the storm from the International Space Station. In the U.S., lightning strikes have sparked dozens of wildfires in Northern California, burning dozens of structures and forcing thousands to flee their homes. More about the blaze in this report.
California was hit by nearly 11,000 lightning strikes in 72 hours, sparking 367 fires. Nearly 24 of the wildfires are major, as the state is also suffering from a record heat wave. U.S. authorities say the pilot of a helicopter fighting fires in California has died after his aircraft crashed. Governor Gavin Newsom has declared an emergency as authorities battle hundreds of blazes.
We are experiencing fires, the likes of which we haven't seen in many, many years. The totality, when you consider 367 active fires that we are aware of all across the state of California, and again, when the smoke starts clearing, the conditions avail themselves with all the reconnaissance that's being done all across the state.
A group of fires about 20 miles east of Palo Alto more than doubled in size overnight and is now burning over 85,000 acres. Governor Newsom has requested 375 fire engines from out of state, with Arizona, Nevada, and Texas sending assistance.
We have requested what we refer to as an EMAC, and this is our emergency assistance program with states all across the western United States. We've now requested 375 EMAC, meaning engines, to come from other states.
Officials went door to door overnight in a frantic effort to clear homes. Thousands of people flee their homes in major cities of California, including San Francisco, after several quick-moving wildfires swept into the region.
It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. China says the U.S. has agreed to hold trade talks over the Phase 1 trade deal in the coming days. At a briefing, Commerce Ministry spokesperson Gao Feng said the talks will evaluate the progress made on the trade deal in the past 6 months. Gao's remarks come after U.S. President Donald Trump postponed August 15 trade talks with China, citing its handling of the coronavirus. U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin, and Chinese Vice Premier Liu He were scheduled to conduct a 6-month review of the trade agreement last week before it was indefinitely postponed. White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows also confirmed that no new high-level talks were scheduled between Washington and Beijing. Australia's flag carrier Qantas has reported an annual loss of over $1.4 billion as it deals with the impact of the coronavirus pandemic. The Australian flag carrier's Group Chief Executive Alan Joyce says trading conditions are the worst in the airline's 100-year history. He said the coronavirus pandemic has devastated the airline industry, with significant underlying loss expected in the next financial year. The firm said around 4,000 of its 6,000 planned job cuts are expected to be finalized by the end of next month, and recovery will be choppy. As the country's international borders remain closed, Qantas says it is not anticipating a resumption of international flights until late 2021. The global airline industry has been hit hard as travel restrictions have been imposed around the world. U.S. stocks hovered around the flat line after weekly jobless claims rose unexpectedly back above 1 million mark last week. Investors were also concerned over a worrying economic outlook from the Federal Reserve. The Dow Jones Industrial Average and the S&P 500 are trading fractionally lower. The Nasdaq Composite Index has gained about 0.25%. Meanwhile, oil prices fell as major producers warned of a risk to demand recovery if the coronavirus crisis is prolonged. U.S. crude inventories also dropped less than expected. In football, Bayern Munich beat Olympique Lyonnais by 3-0 to reach the finals of the Champions League at Estadio José Alouet. Bayern will be looking for their 6th European crown when they face Paris Saint-Germain in the final on Sunday. Lyon's Memphis Depay Karl Toko Ekambi missed early chances before Bayern grabbed the lead through Serge Gnabry in the 18th minute. Gnabry struck again in the 33rd minute as he started and finished the move that involved Robert Lewandowski and Ivan Perisic. Lewandowski made sure of the result with a strike in the 88th minute as the French side were left to rue more missed chances in the second half. The German side will be looking to become the first team to win the Champions League with a 100% record in the tournament this season. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that is all for now. With the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.